Challenging game on the road in Seattle sees the Quakes give up the Heritage Cup for the first time in 3 years, go winless in now 6 games, and worst of all, fall outside the playoff line for the first time since the early stages of the season. Where the Quakes are at now can be characterized as a pretty ugly fall from grace, and as we look ahead to the last 10 games of the season, there are too many doubts creeping in about how real this team's potential really is. My name is Kevin, I'm joined by Luis, and together we're the Quakesaholics. Today we'll be discussing this match against Seattle Sounders. So, starting 11, lots of changes for this game. Probably mostly impacted by the number of players that were unavailable for this matchup, but the quick summary is Ricketts is filling in for Vitor Costa, which had that pretty ugly injury in the Dallas game. We see Kaye coming in for Beau Leroux. I think this is the first game that Kaye has started in a number of weeks at this point, at least that isn't like a straight rotation game. Buda is coming in because we're just playing with 2 central midfielders, so Buda is in the right wing. Espinosa stays in that right wing back position because DeJuan Jones is still injured. And then the last change up top is that Judd is coming in for Joseph Martinez. In terms of defense, it's pretty shaken up to what our typical lineup is. Reed Roberts again plays left center back, Romney fills in at central center back, and then Floriani is finally stepping in for Rodrigues after honestly 2 pretty bad performances from Rodrigues. Lots of changes. What were your thoughts leading into this match, and then how did you feel that individuals played as a whole throughout this game?
Definitely agree with you. It seems like a lot of these lineup decisions were based off of fitness. Also doesn't really help that we had a midweek game. I do think it's a downgrade overall, just considering the typical players that we have seen so far. With that being said, I was pretty impressed with some of the performances, particularly Judd. My respect for Judd has slowly been going up and up. Definitely a big difference in the way I feel about him this season versus last season. I also thought Jamar Ricketts was good as well.
Yeah, I think we did talk about that in the last video of Ricketts being an option, but it was a little bit strange that Romney got subbed in and Roberts got pushed out to the side. I'm glad that Roberts stayed as a left center back in this game and that Ricketts was given the opportunity. And I mean, between Ricketts and Judd, that pays off with the goal, right? I was surprised that Kaye played this game. I felt that Kaye hasn't played up to the level of the rest of the midfielders, and especially not Beau Leroux, but of course that is a high bar to set. And I definitely think that we noticed that. I think a lot of times we were giving up balls in the midfield, and I mean, we'll talk about the overall defense, but giving up the ball when our defense is so high up the field, it just opens up so many opportunities for counters. And when you look at the Seattle team that, I mean, historically, they've always had fast players, and that's something that is part of their DNA of hitting you on the counter. It just really exposed some of the biggest problems that this team has. But yeah, in terms of Ricketts, Judd, Buda as well, I thought Buda played well. But yeah, the defense and goalkeeping is what killed us in this game.
Yeah, I want to comment on Marc-Anthony Kaye. I will say that, to be completely frank, I thought Beau Leroux did have one of his worst games against Dallas. I'm curious if this has something to do with just like fitness, just in terms of rotation. It was just, kind of time to do that. But you're right, for sure. I definitely think going away against a team like Seattle that is going to be fast on the break, you want a bit more control, and we're lacking that this game, and we suffered for it.
Yeah, coming away from a game like this, besides Judd and Ricketts, it's kind of hard to point to players that played particularly well. I mean, Chicho, of course, gets the goal, but it was kind of like a cleanup after Judd had already made contact with the ball. Espinosa providing that service, something that we see pretty regularly now. I think Harks does deserve some mention and merit just because of the hustle that he had in this game. I mean, we see it in every game, so I think it's just an important thing to note that it is continuing. I did say last video that I wanted Floriani to come in for Rodrigues. I think Floriani played fine, but then looking at some of these goals, it's just evident that this is just like an entire defensive system failure and not necessarily individual performances. I think Floriani did have a little bit of culpability on the 3rd goal, I believe. Didn't really go one-on-one too well, but I think overall it's just situations that these defenders are being put in that are pretty difficult to make anything of, and I don't think Rodrigues would have done any better or any worse.
Like we just mentioned, referring to Sounders, especially away, there's going to be a lot of chaos. And I think given the system that we have, given the high line that we put out there, it's expected to have a lot of chaotic moments. That's just kind of like the trade-off that you have by getting that firepower up top. And it's a lot to ask of these players because it's just individual mistakes can make the difference in a game. And I think that can add to the entertainment, but it also adds to a lot of the unpredictability. Also, the first goal, really ugly goal. It's just to look at. It's a poor giveaway from Danielle. And to have Danielle, who can use his hands as the goalie, and Romney, who's a big guy, to both get beat in the air by Musovski is just a really bad look and a terrible way for the game to go after Judd had a great finish.
Yeah, and I wonder how much of that could just be Romney playing centrally for the first time. I feel like when you switch the footedness of a defender, that can also be a bit awkward. We've played with a right-footed center back, as in like central center back, in I think every single game so far, if I'm not mistaken. So that has something to do with it, and also him playing directly in front of Danielle. I'm sure that communication between Danielle and someone like Bruno Wilson, for example, they both speak Portuguese, would have maybe been a little bit easier. There's so many factors that can go into that, and we're not on the field, we're not hearing what they're saying, so who knows what it can be. But agreed, it did not look pretty at all.
One last point about the center back trio. Of course, Floriani and Roberts, these are two, fresh out of college players. They have gotten a good amount of minutes now, I would say, in professional soccer. But still, to put them in a hostile environment like this on the road, it's a lot to ask of these players.
Yeah, and ultimately we're going into Seattle, into this game with what, like 5-6 players that aren't regular starters. So yeah, even just from the moment this game started, it was going to be an uphill battle. And I think a big part of that is because we have so many injuries and injuries in key positions. Coming away from this game, my thoughts on how the Quakes play isn't changed too much. It stings to lose. At least in the past games, we've been getting draws. But I think the underlying issue is still the same, that the elevated defensive line, in theory, it poses a lot of benefits because those defenders can get involved in the attack, and we're pushing the other team just in their box and having them compressed. And like in theory, that all sounds nice, but I think this is just another example of, in practice, the Quakes aren't able to leverage that as a true benefit because it's leaving us exposed more often than not. And yes, the first goal that we scored, you can say that this was a result of center backs being in their half, getting the ball, passing it out wide to Ricketts, and then Ricketts carries it up the ball. But then 2 goals, you watch it back and you're like, okay, all 3 defenders are at the midfield line, and they're giving up way too much space for the counterattacks that we've just suffered all season long. And I think every time I see these kind of goals be conceded, I just become more and more frustrated because it's like the same mistake over and over again. And I'm not blaming the players individually. I'm saying that this is a tactical error, and we just seemingly keep making the same mistake over and over again.
I'm pretty sure this is something that we commented on very early on in the season, is when you have a system like this where the fullbacks are so high and you have a transition moment, often the center backs are getting pulled into places wider, and it's very uncomfortable. And I think to kind of go back to what we were saying earlier in the video, is just the chances of an error happening are just way too high. And I would agree with you. If the fruits of this system aren't being seen enough in open play, then there are questions to be had. The second goal we had was from a set piece. And other than the Judd goal, I don't remember too many clear-cut opportunities that came from open play.
Yeah, in this game, there weren't many, to be honest. And I think that's kind of what I'm pointing to as well. It's just like, in theory, this is a great system, and you can probably point to a lot of, let's just say, European teams that have players that have elevated technical abilities, and they make it work. But we just have players that unfortunately lose balls. It's just part of it. Everyone does it. I mean, even the most consistent players that we have, like Espinosa, he also loses balls in or around the midfield. But if the team is repeatedly doing this, I think something has to be done to address that, or a tactical shift has to be made. And so the Quakes now have 10 games to figure this out. We're not playing in the Open Cup. We didn't qualify for Leagues Cup. We don't have anything to play for other than playoffs. And right now we're sitting 10th in the West. And after every match day, it just seems like we're dropping further and further in the tables. Next game is against Real Salt Lake. They sit right below us. So you can say that this is a 6-point game. I think Judd had the press conference after the Seattle game. He said that they're treating this as a must-win game. I would question them if they didn't feel that way about every game for the remainder of the season. How are you feeling about Quakes' chances of making the playoffs, and are there any matches that particularly stand out as like the ones that we should expect to get results in and the ones that are going to cost us a little bit more than usual?
Yeah, it's definitely concerning. I think we've gone from feeling comfortably in playoffs to that feeling of comfortability slowly being eroded with the past few results that we've had. Too many draws in games we should be winning, and maybe especially at home. And yeah, I think the game against Real Salt Lake is a must win. Absolutely, it is. When you have San Diego, who's been really good so far in their inaugural season, and you do have Vancouver as well, who dropped off a little bit, but still are definitely a force to be reckoned with this season overall. And those are 2 home games too. And after that, 2 more games away. And we know that even if it's against Houston and Austin, who are, the strongest of opposition, it's still a toss up in an away game. So yeah, I think the Real Salt Lake game is you need to get 3 points and fast.
Yeah, looking at these games, honestly, they all seem really tough. The Real Salt Lake one probably feels the most accessible. And then following that, it's like, what, maybe St. Louis at home? But yeah, a lot of road games and even the home games that we have. I mean, like you said, Vancouver, San Diego, LAFC at Levi's, those are going to be tough matchups, super tough matchups. And then even looking ahead all the way to decision day, that's going to be against Austin. And that's a team that we struggled in the Open Cup, and we still have to play them twice. So it's looking more and more difficult. I think it's realistic to still say that, yeah, we have a really good chance of making playoffs. And a big part of that is because although we are in 10th, the teams that are above us are within a point, maybe 2. Like a win could make us jump 3 positions easily if all the other matches go in our favor. So nothing is set in stone by any means, but the Quakes right now really need to focus on getting the job done in the matches that they do play. So yeah, there's another tough result. At least this time it was against a team that was above us in the standings, so you can at least say that this was the logical thing to happen, unlike the game against Dallas. Like we said, still lots of games left to play. Quakes have all the opportunity to make playoffs, which is, I think, the metric for a successful or unsuccessful season. And yeah, the next one will be Real Salt Lake on the road next Saturday, and we'll be here to cover it. If you made it this far, thank you for listening, and we'll catch you next time.
Thank you.